Okay, team. Welcome to another episode of Rethink Real Estate. Today, we're just responding to people that have been reaching out saying that they've been struggling with fee objections or commission objections. So hopefully this episode helps. I do ramble on a little bit, but I think that just the fundamentals of what I'm going through with the structure of when you ask the questions or when you negotiate your commission is a really important part. And then it's a pretty simple strategy that I've always taken. It's always worked for me. Regardless of whether I'm negotiating for my own commission or another agent as a third party in the auction team. It has always been the most logical way to go about it, and it's always worked. So hopefully it helps. Thanks so much. Welcome to Rethink Real Estate. My name is Ben Brady, and this is a real estate podcast aimed to deliver sales strategies, marketing tips, and business insights from industry experts and myself to build a listing-focused business for the future. Let's get into it. So when we continue to get topics that get brought up and comments on our videos or emails that I get from our podcast episodes, is that it's always about individual issues at an individual moment of time. You know, it's like when we run our portion of our auction business is we get to see different marketplaces performing in different ways because you get a flood of agents that reach out to us from that particular marketplace itself. And it's funny, over the last, 48 hours, I've probably had about 4 or 5 requests for us to do something on fee objections. So when I say fee objections, I mean commission objections, I mean all of those different things. But, it's important to understand at the very first degree about how to handle an objection. I think that, if we went through just a general objection theory, one of the most important parts that I think that is important to the structure of handling any objection is not getting defensive. I think that I've been in enough living rooms and watched enough people respond or react or their body language change when a seller asks them for a price reduction. When I say price reduction, I mean a reduction in their commission and in their percentage. Now, you've got to understand that there's a couple of different ways to consider this. And I know that we've spoken about this before, but I think that it's important just to reiterate is that there's the 2 types of individual sellers. You're going to have the ones that are very upfront that they want the best deal possible, and they'll ask you to reduce your commission, they'll compare you to other agents, all of those different things. Then there's the other seller in the equation that you never know that fee objection is going to be a problem. So I think that it's important from the outset that you need to make sure that you provoke the conversation. Now, we've done the structure of the listing presentation agenda and making sure that you get every objection out up front. That is the point of an agenda, is to ensure that we understand where that conversation is going and what direction it's going, and it's to provoke the questions that they might have sitting in the back of their mind and that they're waiting to ask, because you want to give yourself an opportunity to defend yourself. I've given the example previously of a gentleman who used to work for us in one of our offices back in Australia. He was really happy. He walked into the office. I remember being in the Browns Plains office, and he walked in and he's like, "Oh, well, I've definitely got that listing," and I'm like, "Oh, great. Did you sign it?" "No, I didn't." And, sort of just like you're wondering, you're like, "Oh, you don't count your chickens before they hatch." But realistically, the next day I was down in Browns Plains again, and I'm like, "Oh, what about that listing?" He's like, "Oh, no, I didn't get it. They went with a discount brokerage." Back then it was called Go Gecko. For those Aussies that might be listening, you'll understand Go Gecko. They no longer exist. But where it came from is the fact that he's like, "I didn't like." I'm like, "Well, let's go through your objection handlers for fee," and he's like, "Oh, well, they didn't even ask me about fee. They didn't even bring it up. They didn't even talk to me. I didn't even get a chance to defend it." So that's why it's really important at the beginning of your entire listing presentation is asking those qualifying questions, setting an agenda, asking if there's any further things that they'd like to go through, making sure fee is part of it. Then when it comes down to it, let's get down to the nitty gritty and let's dive into this and talk about the different angles and the different approaches. I've always had just one approach and one approach alone. Now, keeping in mind that I haven't done my own listing presentations for quite some time now, so therefore defending it when it is my commission is more of a difficult thing than when I was a third party in a listing presentation in North America, sitting in a living room, negotiating on behalf of somebody else. I'm less attached to the outcome, so therefore naturally I will be better at it. That's why we find that the auction team being plugged into somebody's listing, less attached to the outcome, helps with the education of the client and all of those different things. But that said, is that sitting in front of a seller and them being pretty forceful when it comes to commission, it was always handled the exact same way every single time. I would always address it myself when we got down to the fee element side of it. Well, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, we actually set our commission at 6%. Is the maximum fee that we charge. Now, that said, is that it does stipulate in the contract also that it's subject to negotiation at the time of an acceptable contract. So I want you to understand, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, that, at the end of the day, you have an expectation. And when we're leading down the path of that expectation, and that expectation might not be met, then there has to be compromise from everyone's side. Now, guys, I want to break back into this and give you an understanding. First of all, is that the negotiation position that you're in, or even if it's not the word negotiation that you want to use because it might not be the most friendly word, is that the position of what you're in is that I think that you've got to make sure, when do you negotiate, okay? And or when do you have the most amount of leverage in that situation in order to put yourself in the best position to come out with the best amount or the most amount of commission? Because at the end of the day, one, you've got to believe you're worth it. There's no question about that. But second is that if you were to go into a listing presentation, and keeping in mind the nature of what a listing presentation is that you're sitting there basically pleading with them to give you the business. Now, when I say pleading, you're sitting there and you're presenting in order to get the business. At the end of the day, people say that they take business that they want, but most people have to take the business opportunities that they're given. And especially in a marketplace that is suppressed, like what we're seeing from a transaction count, is that you don't get as many opportunities as what you once did. So therefore, your nature of the way that you go into that might be a little more of, for lack of better terminology, desperation. Now, that said, is that if you are going into the listing presentation, you're going to negotiate with the seller in that moment, of course you're going to lose out. Of course you're going to lose out. They hold all of the leverage in that situation. Your fee depends on whether or not you get the business, is what you're thinking. Whereas if you position it in a different way to have the negotiation later when you have more leverage, is that if you can push the negotiation down to a position where you have an offer in front of them, it's a viable offer, it might be close to the price they want, might be over the price they want, whatever it may be, and it puts you in a position that at the time of that acceptable deal, is that that's where you're going to negotiate. Now, I'm not saying that you don't compromise, because there's no doubt that you compromise, no doubt at all. But realistically, is that again, just coming back to that, is that I know a lot of people that say they don't negotiate their fee. I don't know many agents that have done in excess of 100 deals that wouldn't have compromised on a fee here or there. But it's where you do it is where you give less away. So, for example, if you're at the end of the transaction and right then and there, the finish line is the opportunity for them to sign the contract, enter escrow, and away you go, is that that's the best time to have the discussion around fee. You will give less away in that moment than what you will up front in order to get the business. Because what typically will happen is that you give some away in that listing presentation, then you have to give more away later on to make the deal happen if there is such a gap. So when you do it is the most important element of this. In the listing presentation, it is easy to push it away to the side. And I've really never had a great deal of pushback to this, is that, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, I want to make sure that that I am incentivized in order to get you the highest price possible. So I'd love to put 6% down. Now, keep in mind, 2.5% of that goes to the buyer side, okay, giving me the opportunity for 3.5%. Now, yes, that is over and above what most agents are charging, but realistically, I want to make sure that I'm incentivized to get you the highest and best result. But what I'm going to put in there is a quick little disclaimer, is that it's 6% subject to negotiation at the time of an acceptable deal. So at the moment, at the time that there is a deal in front of you or a contract in front of you, you do not have to sign that unless we have a discussion and we agree on what the sale percentage is going to be at that point. Again, now, okay, I want to make sure that we're both of the nature of being optimistic. I want to make sure that we're getting you the most amount of money. I'm incentivized to do so, and I'm pushing as hard as we possibly can. Is that okay with you? I think that that's a really decent angle to take most of the time. Any reasonable person will want you to be incentivized to get them the most amount of money. Now, if we're going over and above that a little bit further, is that one of the things that I've often found is giving them an understanding of where they might be making a decision based on fee. So then you can go down the path of, if they are a little bit more objective to the situation, and they're coming at you a little harder, and they're saying, "Well, Ben, no, I don't want to sign something that says 6% subject to the time of negotiation. I want to actually determine a fee now, like of 5%." Then I would say to them, "Well, would you agree to not renegotiate that later, regardless?" It's got to be a two-way street in this situation. You can't let them walk all over you based on fee. But then you've also got to ask another question, is that, are you going to be making your decision on who's going to represent you solely off fee? And they're going to say no. I've never actually had somebody say yes to me on that point. Even if, yes, it is the major point for them, I've never had anyone really admit it. So you've got to understand what goes unsaid, folks. We did an episode on the podcast that was what goes unsaid. And what goes unsaid a lot of the times are things that people might be a little bit more conscious about, or their ego might be in play, or they might be embarrassed, or whatever it might be. Speaking about money is typically something that not a lot of people feel ultimately comfortable with. So first things first, if you are going to make a compromise, make sure you get something out of it, okay? So, if I agree to 5%, would you agree that that fee will never be negotiated any further? Now, the other element of this as well that you could go down the path of is that asking the Mr. Seller, look, are you going to be making a decision based on fee? Oh, no, of course. Well, so could we agree that if I go to 5%, that I'm going to be the agent for you? In that moment, if you have to dive into it further, is that, hey, look, if I go to 5%, no problem. But are you saying that then I get the business? Is that correct? Well, yes, that's what we're saying, Ben. Great, excellent. So let me just give you a brief understanding of something that I want you to be clear on, because it sounds like you're going to be making a decision based on fee, okay? And look, I'm delighted that, look, if I can do the business with you right now and we can sign the listing at 5%, okay? But then I also want to include into that is that you don't have a chance to negotiate it later. Is that okay with you? Now, they may feel a little bit of resentment around that. They may feel a little bit of pressure in order to agree to something. But I think that it's really important that you show them the two-way street here. If you're willing to compromise, you get something in return. Now, the other part that I really like to give people an example of, if it comes down to the commission side of things and you want to leave them with a story and you're walking out of there and you're not so comfortable and confident, there's another story that I like to say is that I like to give sellers the perspective and put it into perspective for them, in the sense that, Mr. Seller, the 1% on this deal that we're talking about, say it's $1 million home, okay, is that the 1% on this deal is $10,000 worth of commission. And I want to put that into perspective for you today, because at the end of the day, you may make a decision where somebody just quickly agrees to say 5% and no problem at all. But by the time that you realize that that person is not right for you, and based on the decision that you've made to employ that person as your agent and put them in charge of what possibly is your largest asset, or one of, is that by the time you've realized that that person isn't right for you, there's no such thing as buyer's remorse in real estate transactions when it comes to your agent. By the time you realize that they're not the right person for you all the way through, is that then you've already got a damaged reputation with your property. Let's say that for whatever reason that you do get out of that agreement and that listing agreement, keep in mind that most agreements are for 6 months. So therefore, even if you wanted to remove that agent, you might not be able to get out of the contract and you might not be able to immediately go with someone else. So the thing that you're doing is making a decision that you're going to stick with this agent for a long period of time, but you've realized pretty quickly that they're probably not the right person for your business. At that point, there's no buyer's remorse, as I mentioned. There's no return or refund policy on the agent. The reputation of your property has then taken an immediate hit, because one, it stayed longer on the marketplace. Two, they've ill-advised you maybe around price. But then, not to mention as well, is that if you're going to make a change in an agent, that speaks louder than words to the marketplace itself. Now, I know that you stay in complete control the whole time. You don't have to accept anything that you don't want. But I want you to understand is that that won't stop people thinking that there's blood in the water, okay, and trying to just lowball you. And without the right process and without the right leverage, okay, that can be systemic for a property. So the decision that you're about to make is the decision, okay, that is going to affect the end result. The person affects the end result more than you can imagine, by the list price, by their reputation, by how they handle the situation, by all of the things that come into play. Now, I'm not trying to make you feel any level of anxiety about the decision that you're about to make around your agent. I'm trying to make sure that you understand the weight, okay, of the person that you choose. And at the end of the day, I think that somebody that is going to make sure that they are willing to compromise with you at that particular time, if that is necessary, and only if, because I want to make sure that we are incentivized to get you the best outcome. So guys, if I lead back to everything that's happened here in this situation, like I've never seen a negotiation of fee have to go any further than that extent that I've just gone through with you. One is that I've said to them that we will compromise, no problem at all. But again, I want to make sure that we're incentivized, first of all, to get you the best outcome. So we'll add that it's 6% subject to the negotiation at the time of an acceptable contract. So therefore, that is my absolute word to you is that, and it's in writing, that we will absolutely talk about it at the time of that deal, depending on where it falls based on your expectations. Now, if they're like, that's not good enough, then I'd say, hey, look, what reduction are you looking for? Would you be open to saying that that fee is non-negotiable from here on in then if we're going to make a compromise up front? But then going down deeper into it as well. So let's just say, if we agreed to 5% though, does that mean that we're going to get the business? Is that right? Okay. So therefore you're making it about making sure that you understand what it's about, because even if you agree to 5%, you might not be able to get the business. Now, if they say no, or we've still got to see other agents, well, guys, I'm going to stand at my 6% and these are the reasons why. I want you to understand the decision that you are about to make. Give them the understanding of the weight of the decision that they are about to make all the way through. Now, you've got to come at this from an advisory capacity. You've got to come at this welcoming it. And this is one thing that took me a long time to understand. They're entitled to ask for a better deal. Sometimes I took it as offense. You might have been in a situation where you've created something and somebody, comments or gives feedback on it or asks you a question. One of the points in all of this is that, a lot of people feel entitled to the perspective of that you don't have the right to ask me questions or disagree with me. And that is the nature of what I would say 50% of the times that I've sat in front of sellers and they've asked the fee question of whether or not we're flexible or these agents are charging this or whatever it may be. It's this knee-jerk reaction. It's this knee-jerk look on somebody's face to be like, how dare you? And it can't come from there. It can't come from there. Hopefully this has helped. I know there's a few people that have reached out. So again, there's a lot more detail that we could probably go into and a few more role plays. If you need any help, reach out, ben.brady@harcourtsauctions.com or my cell number 949-632-8995. Thank you. So about 75% of our audience hasn't liked, followed, or subscribed to our podcast. It would mean the world to us, and it would help this podcast more than you know to expand our reach if you were to like, follow, or subscribe on any of the platforms that you're watching or listening on. Thanks again.